What if the man you built your life with, the one who promised forever in front of God and family, was secretly plotting to erase you from it entirely? Imagine standing in a bustling airport, waving goodbye, only to realize that hug might have been his final act of deception, a cold calculation wrapped in a warm embrace. My heart races just thinking about it. The kind of betrayal that shatters everything you thought was real, especially after decades of quiet compromises and unspoken doubts. It's the stuff of nightmares, but for Lorraine Baxter, it was about to become her waking reality. Before we continue, take a moment to share where you're listening from and subscribe to the Ageless Bold Stories channel. I truly love seeing our stories reach across so many places and hearts. Together, we're creating a space where every season of life still holds its own wonder, its own turning point. Now, let's ease ourselves back into the story. It was a crisp autumn evening in 1995, the kind where the wind off Lake Michigan carried a bite that seeped right into your bones. Lorraine Baxter, 58, and feeling every one of those years like a weight on her shoulders, gripped the steering wheel of their sensible Buick sedan a little too tightly as she navigated the winding roads to O'Hare International Airport. The Chicago skyline loomed in the rearview mirror, all twinkling lights and towering ambition. But inside the car, the air felt thick with something unspoken. Lorraine glanced at herself in the mirror, her neat cardigan buttoned just so, pearls at her neck like a talisman of the life she'd chosen. Or had it chosen her? Homemaker, wife, mother. Those roles had defined her for so long, but lately they felt like a costume that no longer fit quite right. Her husband, Reggie, sat beside her, fiddling with his flashy gold watch, a Rolex he'd bought himself last Christmas, claiming it was a reward for closing that big downtown deal. He was the picture of success. Slicked back hair turning silver at the temples, a custom suit that hugged his frame just enough to hide the paunch from too many client dinners, and that cologne, sharp and expensive, like he was trying to mask more than just the faint scent of stress sweat. Reggie Baxter, the real estate developer who'd turned their modest start into an upper-middle-class dream in Lincoln Park. Or so everyone thought. Lorraine had ignored the red flags for years. The late nights at the office that stretched into mornings. The secretive phone calls he took in the garage, whispering urgently before hanging up with a forced smile. "Business, honey," he'd say, pecking her cheek. But deep down, in that quiet place she rarely visited, she wondered if it was all a facade. As they pulled into the departures lane, the airport's fluorescent glow spilled over them like an interrogation light. Travelers hustled by with suitcases and hurried goodbyes, families clinging a moment longer before parting. Lorraine parked at the curb, the engine idling like her own hesitant heart. Reggie turned to her, his eyes scanning her face with that calculated warmth she'd come to recognize. "This New York conference is a game-changer, Lore," he said, his voice smooth as ever. "Big investors, prime properties. I'll be back in 3 days, tops. You hold down the fort, yeah? Keep everything running smooth." There was no real affection in it, just the rote script of their marriage. She nodded, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, Reggie. We'll be fine. Safe travels." He leaned in for a perfunctory peck, lips brushing her cheek like an afterthought, and grabbed his leather briefcase from the back seat. But as he straightened up, something twisted in Lorraine's chest, a sharp pang that caught her off guard. Emotional peak 1. The flood of memories from their early days, when his ambition had seemed like passion and her sacrifices felt like love. Now, at 58, with crow's feet, she no longer bothered to hide, and a body that ached from years of putting everyone else first. She felt the exhaustion crash over her like a wave. Why had she stayed silent through the distance? The cold silences at dinner? Was this what forever looked like? A man who saw her as little more than a reliable fixture in his empire? Reggie paused at the car door, glancing back with a grin that didn't quite mask the flicker of something darker in his eyes. Relief? Love you, babe. Tell Dylan to behave. He shut the door with a thud that echoed in her ears, then strode toward the terminal without a backward glance. Lorraine watched him go, her hands trembling slightly on the wheel. The airport noise swirled around her, announcements blaring, engines revving. But inside, a storm brewed. Emotional peak 2. A surge of resentment bubbled up, hot and unfamiliar, as she recalled the last fight they'd had, whispered in the kitchen so Dylan wouldn't hear. Why the extra insurance policy, Reggie? It's like you're planning for the worst. He'd laughed it off. Just smart planning, Lore. For us. For the future. But now, alone in the car, doubt gnawed at her like never before. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The chilly air seeped through the cracked window, carrying the faint scent of jet fuel and rain-slicked pavement. Dylan, her sweet 7-year-old with those wide, watchful eyes, shifted in the back seat, unusually quiet. He'd been like that all day, clinging to her skirt at home, his little hand sweaty in hers. Lorraine turned the key, the engine rumbling to life, ready to head back to their elegant brownstone in Lincoln Park, the home she'd poured her soul into, with its polished hardwood floors and the garden she'd tended through every season of their marriage. But as she put the car in gear, a deeper unease settled in her gut, like a premonition she couldn't shake. Emotional peak 3. A raw, piercing loneliness hit her then. The kind that comes from realizing you've given your best years to a man who might not deserve them. Tears pricked her eyes, hot, unwelcome, as she pictured the empty house waiting, the bed that felt too big without him, yet somehow colder with him in it. What if this was all there was? At 58, was it too late to demand more, to listen to that inner voice screaming for change? Just as she was about to pull away, Dylan's small voice piped up from the back, trembling with a fear that stopped her cold. Mommy! Wait! Lorraine's foot hovered over the gas pedal, the engine humming impatiently beneath her. But Dylan's voice sliced through the haze like a knife. Mommy! Wait! She froze, her breath catching in her throat. In the rear-view mirror, she could see him, her little boy, all wide eyes and tousled brown hair, strapped into his booster seat with his favorite stuffed bear clutched tight against his chest. Dylan had always been the quiet type, the kind of kid who preferred watching the world from the sidelines rather than jumping in. But tonight, there was something different in his tone, a raw edge that sent a chill racing down her spine, colder than the October wind whistling through the airport lanes. She twisted in her seat, forcing a calm smile even as her pulse quickened. What is it, sweetie? Daddy's already inside. We need to get home. It's past your bedtime. The words felt automatic, the script of motherhood she'd recited 1,000 times. But Dylan didn't smile back. His small face was pale under the harsh glow of the terminal lights, his lower lip trembling as he leaned forward, his seatbelt straining. Those eyes of his, so much like her own, deep brown and always seeming to see right through people, were filled with a terror that no 7-year-old should know. He glanced around nervously, as if the bustling crowd of travelers might overhear, then whispered, We can't go home, Mommy, please. I heard Daddy, this morning, when I was supposed to be asleep. He was on the phone in his office, talking real quiet. He said bad men were coming tonight, while we're sleeping. He said, He said they were gonna make sure we weren't a problem anymore. The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking. Lorraine's mind reeled, a whirlwind of disbelief crashing against the fragile walls she'd built around her doubts. "Dylan, honey, what are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. Daddy wouldn't—" But even as she said it, flashes of memory intruded. The times Dylan had tugged at her apron strings, wide-eyed and insistent about strange cars parked outside their brownstone, or whispers from Reggie's office late at night. She'd brushed them off every time. "Just your imagination, sweetheart." Or, "Daddy's working hard for us." God, how many warnings had she ignored? At 58, she'd learned to smooth over the rough edges of life, to keep the peace in a marriage that had long since lost its spark. But now, staring at her son's frightened face, a crack formed in that armor, letting in a flood of unease she'd buried deep. Her hands shook as she killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the chaos around them, suitcases rumbling on the pavement, muffled announcements echoing from the speakers, the distant roar of a plane taking off. Emotional peak 1. A wave of guilt washed over her, hot and unrelenting, for all the time she'd dismissed Dylan's quiet observations as childish fancy. He was her miracle baby, born after years of trying, the light in her otherwise dimming world. How could she have let Reggie's dismissiveness rub off on her? "Tell me exactly what you heard," she said softly, unbuckling her seatbelt and climbing into the back to sit beside him. She pulled him close, his small body trembling against her cardigan, the scent of his shampoo, innocent and sweet, mixing with the metallic tang of fear in the air. Dylan buried his face in her shoulder for a moment, then pulled back, his voice a hushed rush. "I woke up early, before the sun was up. I was thirsty, so I went downstairs, quiet-like, 'cause I didn't want to wake you. Daddy was in his office with the door cracked. He was on that old phone, the one he keeps in the drawer. He said, 'Yeah, tonight's the night. Make it look like an accident, gas leak or something. I'll be in New York, solid alibi.' Then he laughed. Mommy, but it wasn't a nice laugh. It was scary. And he said we'd be out of the way for good." Tears welled in his eyes now, spilling over as he clutched her sleeve. "Please believe me this time. I promise I'm not making it up." Lorraine's world tilted on its axis. Her breath came in shallow bursts, the airport lights blurring through the windshield as panic clawed at her chest. Reggie, her husband of 12 years, the man who'd charmed her at that charity gala back in '83 with his big dreams and easy smile, planning something sinister? It sounded absurd, like one of those true crime shows she flipped past on TV. But the pieces started clicking. The life insurance policy he'd insisted on increasing last spring, calling it just in case, with that too smooth grin. The way he'd been locking his office door more often, claiming confidential deals. The odd withdrawals from their joint account that he'd waved off as business expenses. Emotional peak 2. Betrayal surged through her like fire, burning away the numbness she'd worn like a second skin. How had she let herself become this? A woman who ignored the whispers in her gut for the sake of stability? She glanced out the window, half expecting to see Reggie emerging from the terminal, realizing he'd forgotten something. But he was gone, swallowed by the crowd, off to his conference that now felt like a convenient escape. The thought made her stomach churn. If Dylan was right, and every maternal instinct screamed that he was, going home meant walking into a trap. But where could they go? Their friends were all Reggie's contacts, real estate buddies, country club acquaintances, who'd side with him in a heartbeat. Her family was scattered, her parents long gone, and her sister in California too far for a midnight drive. Money? She had maybe $50 in her purse, the credit cards tied to accounts Reggie monitored. Taking a ragged breath, Lorraine stroked Dylan's hair, her mind racing for a plan. "Okay, baby, I believe you. We're not going home tonight." His little face lit up with relief, but the fear lingered in his eyes, mirroring her own. She restarted the car, pulling out into the stream of traffic with no clear destination. Just away from the airport, away from the life that suddenly felt like a lie. Spotting a sign for a budget motel off the highway, a dingy place called the Windy City Inn with flickering neon lights, she veered toward it. It wasn't much, but it was anonymous, a place to think, to breathe. As they checked in under her maiden name, paying cash to avoid a trail, the clerk barely looked up from his magazine, handing over a key to room 12. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap air freshener. The bedspread faded, and the TV bolted to the wall. Lorraine locked the door, double-checked the chain, then sank onto the edge of the bed with Dylan curled beside her. Emotional peak 3. A fierce protectiveness roared to life inside her, drowning out the doubt. This was her son, her everything, and she'd be damned if she'd let Reggie, or anyone, harm him. But as the adrenaline faded, questions piled up like storm clouds. What now? How deep did this go? And what if Reggie found out they were alive? She tucked Dylan in, his eyelids heavy with exhaustion, but sleep evaded her. Staring at the cracked ceiling, Lorraine's mind spun toward the unimaginable. What if they went back, just to watch from afar? It was risky, insane even, but she needed proof, something to confirm the nightmare unfolding. Little did she know. That decision would lead them straight into the heart of the fire. The motel room clock glowed a harsh red, 11:47 p.m. Lorraine sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, her fingers twisting the hem of her cardigan as Dylan finally drifted off beside her, his small chest rising and falling in uneasy sleep. The boy's words echoed in her head like a bad dream she couldn't shake. Bad men coming tonight. At 58, she'd prided herself on being practical, the kind of woman who balanced checkbooks and baked casseroles for church potlucks without complaint. But practicality didn't cover this. A husband potentially plotting something unthinkable, a child begging her to believe him. She paced the threadbare carpet, the muffled sounds of traffic on the nearby highway, doing little to drown out her racing thoughts. Going back to the house felt reckless. But staying here, paralyzed in this dingy room with its peeling wallpaper and faint musty smell, wasn't an option either. She needed to see for herself. If nothing happened, maybe it was all a misunderstanding, a kid's overactive imagination amplified by too many late-night TV shows. But if something did, well, she'd cross that bridge when she came to it. Gently, she shook Dylan's shoulder. "Sweetie, wake up. We're going for a little drive." His eyes fluttered open, groggy but instantly alert, that watchful gaze locking onto hers. "To watch the house?" he whispered, sitting up without protest. She nodded, helping him into his coat. "Just to be sure, okay? We'll stay hidden." They slipped out into the night, the motel parking lot lit by a single flickering street lamp that cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt. The air was sharper now, carrying the promise of frost, and Lorraine shivered as she buckled Dylan into the back seat. Driving back toward Lincoln Park felt surreal, the familiar streets twisting into something ominous under the cover of darkness. Streetlights buzzed overhead, illuminating rows of stately brownstones with their wrought iron fences and manicured front steps. Homes like theirs, symbols of the life Reggie had built, or so she'd thought. She didn't head straight to their driveway. Instead, she took a roundabout route through the quieter side streets, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror for any sign of following headlights. Why are we going this way, Mommy? Dylan asked from the back, his voice small but steady. To be sneaky, she replied, forcing a lightness she didn't feel. Like spies in those books you like. He managed a tiny smile, but it faded quickly, his fingers drumming nervously on his bear. Lorraine's heart pounded harder with every block, a drumbeat of doubt and dread. What if she was wrong to drag him into this? At her age, she should be planning retirement cruises, not playing detective in the dead of night. But Dylan's insistence earlier, that desperate plea at the airport, it had cracked something open in her, a fierce need to protect him that overrode her usual caution. Finally, she found a spot on a parallel street, tucked between two massive oaks that shrouded the car in darkness. From here, through a gap in the hedges, they had a clear view of their brownstone, the warm glow of the porch light she'd left on, the bay windows where she'd hung lace curtains she'd sewn herself, the upstairs bedroom where Dylan's nightlight would be casting stars on the ceiling. Everything looked so normal, so safe, like the home where she'd raised her son, hosted holiday dinners, and endured the slow erosion of her marriage. Lorraine cut the engine, plunging them into silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Now we wait, she murmured, her breath fogging the window. Dylan nodded, pressing his face to the glass, his eyes scanning the street with that uncanny focus of his. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The dashboard clock ticked past midnight, and Lorraine's mind wandered to the what-ifs. What if Reggie really was in New York, schmoozing investors over steak and martinis? What if Dylan's eavesdropping was just a mix-up, some business deal gone sour that sounded worse than it was? She almost convinced herself to start the car and head back to the motel, maybe grab some hot cocoa from a drive-thru to calm their nerves. But then Dylan stiffened beside her. Mommy, look. His finger pointed shakily toward their street. Lorraine's blood turned to ice as a black sedan crept into view, its headlights off, gliding silently like a predator. It wasn't a neighbor's car, too nondescript, too deliberate in its slow approach. It pulled up right in front of their brownstone, engine purring softly before cutting out. Two men stepped out, burly figures in dark jackets and baseball caps pulled low, their faces obscured by shadows. They moved with purpose, no hesitation, scanning the street once before heading straight to the front door. Lorraine's breath caught as one of them reached into his pocket. She half expected a crowbar, something crude for a break-in that she could handle, call the cops, file a report. But no. He pulled out a key, a goddamn key, glinting under the porch light as he slid it into the lock with ease. The door swung open without a creak, and they vanished inside, not bothering to turn on the lights. Flashlight beams danced behind the curtains, probing, searching. Who are they, Mommy? Dylan whispered, his voice trembling now. Lorraine couldn't answer. Her throat had gone dry, a vice of terror squeezing her chest. That key, it had to be from Reggie's spare, the one he kept in his locked desk drawer, the one only he had access to. How else? The realization hit like a slap. This wasn't random. This was planned. Emotional peak 1. A surge of nausea roiled in her gut, the betrayal sinking in deeper. Sharper than any argument or cold shoulder ever had. Reggie, her husband, the father of her child, had he handed over their home, their sanctuary, to these strangers? For what? She fumbled for her bulky cell phone, the kind that flipped open with an antenna you had to pull out, her fingers numb as she debated dialing 911. But what would she say? My son thinks my husband hired men to hurt us? They'd think she was hysterical, a menopausal woman spinning tales. No, she needed to see this through, to know the full extent. The men were inside maybe 5 minutes, long enough to case the place, to set whatever trap Dylan had overheard. Lorraine's heart hammered so loudly she was sure Dylan could hear it. "Stay down, baby," she hissed, pulling him lower in the seat. Then, a faint, acrid smell drifted through the cracked window. Gasoline? No, it couldn't be. But as she watched, a thin wisp of smoke curled from the downstairs window, followed by another from the kitchen. The glow started small, an eerie orange flicker behind the glass, but it grew fast, flames licking up the curtains she'd picked out at Marshall Field's just last year. The fire spread with terrifying speed, devouring the living room, shattering a window with a pop that echoed down the street. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have called it in, but the men were already slipping out the back, melting into the shadows like ghosts. Emotional peak 2. Rage boiled up inside Lorraine, hot and unfiltered, erasing the years of quiet endurance. How dare Reggie do this? Burn their home, their memories, the photo albums of Dylan's first steps, the quilt her mother had made before passing. It was all going up in flames, and for what? Insurance? Revenge? She clutched the steering wheel, knuckles white, as tears blurred her vision. Dylan whimpered beside her. "They're burning it, Mommy, just like Daddy said." But the final blow came moments later. Her phone buzzed in her lap, the screen lighting up with a text from Reggie. "Just landed in NY. Hope you and the kid are snug as bugs. Miss you already. Talk soon." The words mocked her, a perfect alibi typed out while their world burned. Emotional peak 3. Utter devastation crashed over her, a sob escaping her lips as the full weight of his deception settled in. This wasn't just betrayal. It was attempted murder. And if they hadn't listened to Dylan, they'd be inside right now, trapped in the inferno. The fire trucks arrived, hoses unleashing torrents of water. But it was too late. The house was engulfed. Lorraine started the car with shaking hands, pulling away slowly to avoid drawing attention. They couldn't stay. Reggie would find out soon enough that no bodies were found. But where to now? As the flames receded in the mirror, one thought crystallized. She had to fight back. For Dylan. For herself. Little did she know, the faded business card in her wallet was about to become their lifeline. As the fire truck's lights painted the night in flashing reds and blues, Lorraine eased the Buick down the side street. Her eyes glued to the rearview mirror, where the inferno that was once her home shrank into a distant glow. The acrid stench of smoke clung to her clothes, seeping through the vents despite the windows being rolled up tight. Dylan's face was pressed against the glass, his breath fogging it in quick bursts, silent tears tracking down his cheeks. "It's all gone, Mommy," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the wail of more sirens converging on the scene. Lorraine reached back, squeezing his knee with a hand that wouldn't stop trembling. "I know, baby, but we're safe. That's what matters." Her words felt hollow, a band-aid on a gaping wound, but she had to say them, for him, for herself. At 58, she'd lost things before. Her parents, dreams of a career shelved for marriage, the spark in her eyes that used to turn heads. But this? Watching strangers torch the life she'd built brick by brick? It was a violation that cut to her core. She drove aimlessly at first, weaving through the quiet neighborhoods of Lincoln Park, the stately homes mocking her with their untouched serenity. Street after street of glowing windows, families inside probably tucked in with cups of tea and late-night TV, oblivious to the nightmare unfolding blocks away. Lorraine's mind raced faster than the car. Reggie, with his slick smiles and empty promises, had orchestrated this. The key, the timing, it all pointed to him. But why? Was it the money troubles she'd suspected? Those hushed arguments over bills he'd always deflected with, "I've got it handled, Lor?" Or something darker, a resentment built over years of her quiet questions, her growing independence in small ways, like joining that book club he scoffed at? Emotional peak 1. A fresh wave of fury ignited in her chest, burning hotter than the flames they'd fled. How could the man who'd vowed, "Till death do us part," try to make that literal? She pounded the steering wheel once, hard, startling Dylan. "Sorry, sweetie," she whispered, swallowing the bile rising in her throat. Pulling over under a canopy of trees in a deserted park lot, Lorraine killed the engine again, the sudden quiet amplifying the chaos in her head. The bulky cell phone sat heavy in her lap, its antenna retracted like a defeated flag. She stared at it, half dreading, half hoping for some sign from Reggie. A call, maybe, frantic and full of lies about hearing the news. But nothing came. Dylan unbuckled and climbed into the front seat, curling against her side like he used to as a toddler during thunderstorms. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice muffled against her cardigan. She wrapped an arm around him, inhaling the familiar scent of his hair, grounding herself in the one pure thing left in her world. "We figure it out together. First, we need help. Someone who isn't tied to your daddy's world." Her fingers brushed her purse, and that's when it hit her. The faded business card from her father, tucked in a side pocket like a forgotten relic. Years ago, before the cancer took him, her dad had pulled her aside during a hospital visit, his grip weak but his eyes sharp. "Lorraine, that husband of yours, I don't trust him. Too smooth, too ambitious. If things ever go south, call this number. Helena Voss, she's an old friend, tough as nails in fraud cases." At the time, she'd laughed it off, offended on Reggie's behalf. "Dad, Reggie's good to us. You're worrying over nothing." But now, with smoke still stinging her eyes and the weight of betrayal pressing down, she saw it clearly. Her father had seen the cracks she'd ignored. Emotional peak 2. Gratitude mixed with grief swelled in her, tears spilling over as she realized how blind she'd been. Her dad, gone 2 years now, had left her this lifeline from beyond the grave. With shaking fingers, she fished out the card. Yellowed edges, a simple print. Helena Voss, attorney at law, with a downtown Chicago number. It was past 1 a.m., but desperation didn't keep office hours. Lorraine flipped open the phone, the glow casting eerie shadows on her face, and dialed. It rang 4 times, her heart sinking with each one, before a gravelly voice answered. "Voss here. This better be good. I'm not a 24-hour hotline." Lorraine's words tumbled out in a rush. The airport drop-off, Dylan's warning, the men with the key, the fire swallowing their home. "My husband. I think he set it up. Please. I don't know where else to turn." There was a pause, the sound of rustling papers on the other end. "Lorraine Baxter? Your dad was Harlan, right? He mentioned you might call one day. Get to my office in the Loop. Address on the card. I'll be waiting." The line clicked dead, but relief flooded Lorraine like cool water on scorched earth. They drove in silence, the city lights blurring through her tears as they headed downtown. Dylan dozed fitfully against her shoulder when she glanced at him, his trust in her unwavering despite the terror. The Loop was deserted at this hour, skyscrapers looming like silent judges, the wind howling through the empty streets. Helena's office was in a modest brick building squeezed between towering banks, the kind of place that screamed no nonsense. Lorraine parked haphazardly, bundling Dylan in her arms. He was getting heavy, but she carried him like precious cargo up the steps. The door buzzed open before she could knock, And there stood Helena, mid-60s, gray hair pulled into a tight bun, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, dressed in a rumpled blouse and slacks, like she'd been roused from bed, but was already in battle mode. "Come in, quick," Helena said, locking the door behind them with a series of deadbolts that clanged like prison bars. The office smelled of strong coffee and old files, stacks of papers towering on every surface, a single lamp casting a warm glow. She pointed to a worn couch. "Put the boy there, blanket in the corner." Lorraine laid Dylan down gently, covering him as he stirred, but didn't wake. Helena poured 2 mugs of coffee from a pot that looked like it had been brewing since morning. "Sit, talk, all of it, from the start." Lorraine sank into a chair, the steam from the mug warming her face as she recounted everything again. The airport farewell, Dylan's whisper, the hidden vigil, the key, the flames. Her voice cracked on the details, the horror fresh and raw. Helena listened without interrupting, her expression unchanging, but her eyes narrowed at key points. When Lorraine finished, she leaned back, steepling her fingers. "Your dad hired me quietly a few years back to poke around Reggie's dealings. Nothing concrete then, but red flags. Gambling whispers, shady loans. I'll pull the files." Emotional peak 3. Hope flickered in Lorraine for the first time that night, fragile but real, as she realized she wasn't alone in this fight. But as Helena rummaged in a locked cabinet, Lorraine's phone buzzed again. Another text from Reggie. "Heard about a fire in the neighborhood. Everything okay? Call me." The lie stared back at her, twisting the knife deeper. He knew, of course he did. And now, the game was on. With the files spread out, bank statements showing drained accounts, notes on mob-tied casinos, Helena outlined the plan. Gather proof from the ruins before Reggie returned. Build a case with her detective contacts. It was risky, but Lorraine nodded, steel forming in her spine. For Dylan, sleeping soundly now, she'd walk through fire herself. Little did she know, the next step would plunge them right back into the ashes. As the first hints of dawn crept through the grimy blinds of Helena's office, painting the cluttered room in muted grays, Lorraine clutched her coffee mug like a lifeline, the bitter brew doing little to chase away the chill that had settled in her bones. The files lay splayed across the desk, yellowed pages of bank statements with circled withdrawals that made her stomach twist, scribbled notes on underground poker games tied to names she'd only heard in whispers about Chicago's shadowy underbelly. Reggie, her Reggie, neck deep in it all. Helena paced slowly, her sensible loafers scuffing the worn linoleum, her face etched with the kind of world-weary determination that came from decades fighting in courtrooms against men just like him. "This isn't just bad luck, Lorraine," she said, her voice gravelly from years of late-night smokes and even later arguments. "Your husband's been playing with fire, literally. Those loan sharks from the outfit don't mess around. They lend big, but they collect bigger, with interest that could bury a man." Lorraine glanced at Dylan, still curled on the couch under the blanket, his face peaceful in sleep despite the nightmare they'd escaped. At 7, he shouldn't know words like alibi or accident, but here they were, huddled in a stranger's office because her husband's secrets had nearly killed them. "How did it get this bad?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Emotional peak 1. Shame washed over her then, hot and unrelenting, for all the signs she'd willfully ignored. The fancy watch bought on credit, the business trips that left her alone with the bills, the way Reggie had snapped when she'd suggested cutting back on dinners out. At 58, she felt foolish, like a woman who'd traded her intuition for the illusion of security. Helena stopped pacing, leaning against a file cabinet stacked high with case folders. Men like Reggie start small, a bet here, a loan there, but it snowballs. Your dad saw it coming. That's why he had me dig. These papers show he siphoned off your joint savings, forged your signature on a few docs to bump that life insurance. $1.8 million payout on a tragic house fire? It's textbook desperation. The words landed like punches, each one knocking the breath out of her. Lorraine set the mug down with a clatter, her hands trembling as she flipped through the pages. Casino receipts from seedy spots in the 90s scene, like those hidden rooms behind River North bars where high rollers lost fortunes. Reggie's name jumped out, tied to debts climbing over $400,000, with threats scrawled in margins. Pay up or pay the price. How had she not seen it? The late nights he'd claimed were closing deals, the irritability that had turned their home into a minefield. Emotional peak 2. Grief mingled with the anger now, a deep sorrow for the marriage she'd clung to, for the father Dylan deserved but never had. Tears blurred the ink on the papers, and she wiped them away fiercely. He was going to let us burn for this? His own family? Helena nodded grimly, pouring herself another cup. Looks that way, but we're not letting him win. First, we need solid proof, something beyond a kid's word and your gut. Those thugs left traces. Pros always do. They talked in low tones as the city stirred outside, horns blaring from early commuters, the rumble of the L train shaking the windows. Helena sketched a plan on a legal pad. Wait for the fire scene to clear a bit, then sneak back under cover of night to Reggie's office in the ruins. That locked desk of his, the spare key came from there, right? Bet there's more. Ledgers, maybe a burner phone with call logs to those goons? Lorraine's pulse quickened at the thought. Risky? Yes. But the alternative was running blind, waiting for Reggie to realize his plan had failed and come hunting. What about the police? She asked. Helena snorted. Some are clean, but with the outfit ties. We go to my guy, Detective Moran. Old school, incorruptible. But we need evidence first, or it's he said she said. Dylan stirred then, rubbing his eyes and sitting up with a yawn. Mommy, is it morning? He looked around the unfamiliar room, his gaze landing on Helena with wary curiosity. Lorraine pulled him onto her lap, hugging him close. Almost, sweetie. This is Miss Voss. She's a friend of Grandpa's. She's going to help us. Helena knelt down to his level, her stern face softening just a touch. Hey, kiddo. Heard you were the smart one who saved the day. Want some cocoa? I got the instant kind in the back. Dylan nodded shyly, his observant eyes taking her in, and for the first time that night, a tiny spark of normalcy flickered. A child trusting an adult, a simple act amid the wreckage. As Helena rummaged in a small kitchenette, Lorraine's mind raced ahead. Reggie would be landing back soon, playing the shocked husband for the cameras, scouring the ashes for confirmation of their deaths. But they were alive, and with Helena's help, they'd turn the tables. Emotional peak 3. Determination surged through her, stealing her nerves like never before. At her age, she'd thought her fighting days were over, reserved for PTA meetings and garden club squabbles. But for Dylan, she'd become a warrior. When do we go back? She asked as Helena returned with the cocoa. The attorney handed Dylan the mug, then met Lorraine's eyes with a steely glint. Tonight, after dark. But first, rest. You'll need your strength. The hours blurred in the office, Helena fielding calls from contacts, piecing together Reggie's movements via a PI friend who'd tailed him before. Lorraine dozed fitfully in a chair, Dylan playing quietly with some old law books as props for his bear. By afternoon, the news hit the radio. Tragic fire in Lincoln Park claims luxury brownstone. Family presumed inside. Reggie's voice crackled through a clip. Feigned devastation thick in his tone. My wife, My son. God, please let them be okay. Lorraine's blood boiled. The act, the lies. But Helena squeezed her shoulder. That's our edge. He thinks you're gone. Gives us time. As evening fell, the plan solidified. Enter through the back alley, avoid any lingering cops. Target the office where fire damage was lightest, per Helena's intel. Dylan insisted on coming. I know Daddy's hiding spots, Mommy. The loose board under the rug. His perceptiveness, once dismissed as shyness, now felt like their secret weapon. Lorraine hesitated, but Helena agreed. Kids see what we miss. They geared up with flashlights and gloves from Helena's emergency kit, a woman prepared for anything. Stepping out into the cooling air, Lorraine felt the weight of it all, but also a budding resolve. This wasn't just survival, it was reclaiming her life from the ashes. But as they piled into Helena's old Volvo, Lorraine's phone buzzed once more. Reggie. Devastated, coming home now, praying for a miracle. The hypocrisy fueled her, but deep down, fear lingered. What if he beat them to the ruins? As twilight deepened over the Chicago skyline, casting long shadows through the office windows, Helena spread the files wider across her cluttered desk, the papers rustling like dry leaves in the quiet room. Lorraine leaned forward, her eyes scanning the documents with a mix of horror and dawning clarity. Columns of numbers that didn't add up. Receipts from places like the backroom games at Cal's Lounge in the old Stockyards district, where Reggie had claimed he was networking with investors. The debts stared back at her in black and white. $50,000 here, $100,000 there, snowballing into a crushing $400,000 owed to names linked to the Chicago outfit. Those shadowy figures from the 90s mob scene who'd shifted from bootlegging to high-stakes gambling rackets. Helena tapped a finger on one page, her nail blunt and practical. See this? He bumped your life insurance to $1.8 million 6 months back. Forged your signature on the rider for accidental death. Said it was for peace of mind, I'll bet. But with these sharks breathing down his neck, it was his getaway plan. Burn the house, collect the payout, walk away clean while you're, well, you know. Lorraine's breath hitched, the room spinning for a moment as the pieces locked into place. At 58, she'd always handled the household budget, pinching pennies on groceries to make ends meet during Reggie's slow periods. But this? Embezzled family savings, her inheritance from her folks funneled into poker tables and loan repayments? It was a betrayal that went beyond the fire, straight to the heart of their vows. Emotional peak 1. Disbelief gave way to a searing pain, like a knife twisting in her gut, as she realized the man she'd shared a bed with for 12 years had valued her life in dollars. He spent my mother's money? The nest egg she left for Dylan? Her voice rose, cracking on her son's name. Dylan, sensing the tension even in his cocoa-sipping haze, set down his mug and climbed onto her lap again, his small arms wrapping around her neck. It's okay, Mommy. We got away. His words, so innocent and brave, broke something in her, a dam of suppressed rage and sorrow. Helena nodded solemnly, her own past flickering in her eyes. She'd mentioned in passing her brushes with corrupt clients, cases where she'd stared down mob lawyers in smoke-filled courtrooms. Your dad commissioned these quietly 3 years ago, after noticing Reggie's flashy spending didn't match his deals. Harlan was sharp. He smelled the rot. These forgeries? That's fraud on top of the arson. But we need more to nail him, something tying him directly to those thugs. She closed the folder with a snap, her no-nonsense demeanor cutting through Lorraine's fog like a lifeline. Lorraine wiped her eyes, feeling a shift inside. The panicked victim from the airport was fading, replaced by a woman ready to claw back her power. I won't let him get away with this, she said, her voice steadying. For Dylan, for everything he's destroyed, I vow to fight back, whatever it takes. They spent the next hour hashing out the details, Helena sketching on her legal pad while Dylan doodled nearby, his observant eyes flicking between them as if memorizing every word. The plan was risky, but straightforward. Wait until full dark when the fire investigators would have wrapped for the day, then slip into the charred brownstone via the back alley, where a neighbor's overgrown hedge provided cover. Reggie's office on the second floor had likely survived the worst of the blaze. Helena had a contact at the fire department who'd confirmed it over a quick call. We'll target that locked desk and any hidden spots, Helena said, her tone clipped and efficient. Ledgers, phones, anything with names or numbers linking him to the arsonists. Moran's my detective buddy. He's clean, owes me from a case back in '89. But we go in light, flashlights, gloves, no traces left behind. Dylan perked up then, setting down his crayon. I know a secret place, Miss Voss. Under the floor in Daddy's office, there's a loose board where he hides stuff. I saw him once when I was playing hide-and-seek. His voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes held that quiet wisdom, the same perceptiveness that had saved them at the airport. Helena's stern face cracked into a rare smile. Smart kid. That's why you're coming. Eyes like yours spot what us old folks miss. Lorraine hesitated, maternal instinct flaring. He's just a boy. He's been through enough. But Dylan squeezed her hand. I want to help, Mommy. I can be brave. Emotional peak 2. Pride swelled in Lorraine's chest, mingled with a fierce protectiveness as she saw her son not as fragile, but resilient. At her age, she'd learned kids bounced back in ways adults couldn't, and his trust in her fueled her own courage. As night fully blanketed the city, they prepared. Helena digging out dark jackets from a closet, left over from a stakeout gig, and handing Lorraine a small pry bar, just in case. Dylan zipped up his coat, his stuffed bear tucked inside for luck. The office clock ticked toward 10 p.m., the streets outside humming with distant traffic. Lorraine's phone buzzed intermittently, more texts from Reggie, escalating from feigned concern to urgent demands. Where are you? Cops say no bodies found. Call me now! Each one hardened her resolve, the hypocrisy like fuel on her inner fire. Helena pocketed her keys. He's unraveling. Good. Desperate men slip up. We'll beat him there. My PI says his flight's delayed. Stepping into the crisp air, Lorraine felt the weight of the unknown pressing down, but also a spark of empowerment she hadn't known in years. The Volvo rumbled to life, headlights cutting through the dark as they headed toward Lincoln Park. Dylan hummed softly in the back, a nervous habit, while Helena drove with focused silence. Emotional peak 3. Anticipation built in Lorraine like a storm, a mix of terror and exhilaration. At 58, she was no longer the homemaker waiting for life to happen. She was taking it back. But as the familiar streets loomed, a nagging doubt crept in. What if the thugs returned first? What horrors waited in the ashes? The climax loomed, but for now, the night held its breath. The Volvo hummed quietly through the darkened streets of Lincoln Park, its headlights dimmed to low beams, as Helena navigated the back alleys with the precision of someone who'd done this before. Maybe in her younger days, chasing down leads for shady divorce cases or fraud busts. Lorraine sat in the passenger seat, her fingers knotted in her lap, the dark jacket Helena had loaned her feeling foreign and heavy, like armor for a battle she never signed up for. At 58, sneaking around like a common thief wasn't how she'd pictured her life, but then again, neither was watching her home burn at her husband's command. Dylan huddled in the back, his eyes wide but determined, clutching the flashlight like a talisman. The city felt alive in the wrong way tonight. The distant hum of traffic on Lakeshore Drive, the occasional bark of a dog echoing off brick walls, everything amplified by her nerves. Reggie's latest text burned in her mind. "Heading to the house now. Miracle you're alive? We need to talk." The veneer of concern was cracking. He knew something was off. Helena parked 2 blocks away in a shadowed lot behind a closed deli, killing the engine with a soft click. "We go on foot from here," she whispered, her breath visible in the chilly air as they stepped out. The neighborhood was quiet, most folks tucked in for the night, but the faint scent of smoke still lingered, a grim reminder that hung like fog. Yellow police tape fluttered around the perimeter of their brownstone, the charred skeleton of it looming under the streetlights. Blackened walls sagging, windows shattered like broken teeth. The roof partially caved in where the flames had raged hottest. Lorraine's heart clenched at the sight. This was where she'd baked birthday cakes for Dylan, argued with Reggie over trivial things like the thermostat, dreamed of a peaceful retirement. Now it was a tomb of memories, and they were about to desecrate it for survival's sake. They ducked under the tape at the back alley, Helena leading with a sure step, her pry bar tucked under her arm. "Stay close. No lights yet," she murmured. Dylan gripped Lorraine's hand tightly, his small palm sweaty but steady. The back door, once painted a cheerful red, was now a scorched husk hanging off its hinges. Helena shouldered it open with a creak that made Lorraine wince, and they slipped inside. The air hit them like a punch, thick with soot and the chemical tang of fire retardant, the floor crunching underfoot with debris. Flashlights flicked on in narrow beams, revealing the devastation. The kitchen cabinets melted into grotesque shapes. The living room a sea of ash where the couch had been. Lorraine swallowed hard, fighting the urge to turn back. "Upstairs," Helena directed. "Office should be intact enough." The stairs groaned under their weight, charred but holding, each step a test of nerves. Reggie's office door was ajar. The room spared the worst. Walls smoke-stained but standing. The desk a blackened island amid the chaos. Papers scattered like fallen leaves, the air still warm from residual heat. Lorraine's beam swept the space, landing on the locked desk drawer where the spare key had been. "Start there," Helena said, handing her the pry bar. With a grunt, Lorraine wedged it in, the wood splintering after years of secrets. Inside, stacks of cash bound in rubber bands, maybe 10 grand, dirty money, and a small safe bolted to the bottom. But Dylan tugged her sleeve. "Not that, Mommy. The secret spot." His voice was a whisper, but his eyes gleamed with that keen insight, pointing to the rug in the corner, singed but intact. Lorraine knelt, rolling it back with Helena's help, revealing a loose floorboard Dylan had spotted months ago while playing spy games Reggie never knew about. "I watched him hide stuff there," Dylan explained, his small fingers prying it up with surprising ease. Underneath, a metal lockbox, rusted but secure. Helena jimmied the lock with a paperclip from her pocket. "Old trick from my paralegal days." And it popped open. Inside, the jackpot, ledgers filled with Reggie's meticulous handwriting, detailing mob loans, dates, amounts, names like Vinny the Shark and Outfit Enforcer Number 2, totaling the crushing debt. Scattered among them, a cheap burner phone, its call log showing numbers to the arsonists, cryptic texts like "Make it clean, gas leak style, alibi solid," and notes on the insurance scam, policy details, payout estimates, even a scribbled timeline: fire night, NY trip, collect after tragic loss. Lorraine's hands shook as she stuffed it all into the backpack Helena had brought, the evidence heavy with betrayal. Emotional peak 1. Elation mixed with revulsion surged through her. This was it, the smoking gun that could bury Reggie. But holding his cold calculations in her hands made the hurt fresh, like salt in a wound. At her age, she'd thought love meant enduring, but this was proof it had been a transaction all along. Dylan beamed quietly, proud of his find, while Helena nodded approval. Good eye, kid. This ties him to the mob and the hit. Moran's gonna love it. They zipped the bag, ready to bolt, but then footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, echoing from downstairs. Lorraine froze, her beam snapping off as Helena signaled silence. Voices drifted up, low and gruff. Boss said check the office. Make sure nothing's left. Yeah, and no bodies found? Something ain't right. The same thugs from the fire, back to tie up loose ends. Panic clawed at Lorraine's throat. The stairs were the only way out, and they were trapped. Dylan whimpered softly, burrowing against her, his bravery cracking under the fear. Helena mouthed, closet, pointing to the small wardrobe in the corner. They crammed in, pulling the door shut just as the footsteps hit the landing. Through the slats, Lorraine watched the beams of their flashlights sweep the room. The taller one, burly, with a scar across his cheek, spotted the open floorboard first. Hell, someone's been here. Box is gone. His partner cursed, kicking debris. Footprints, small ones, kid size? They pulled guns, the metal glinting ominously. Emotional peak 2. Terror gripped Lorraine like a vice, her heart pounding so loud she feared they'd hear it. At 58, facing down armed men in her ruined home, she felt every ache, every regret, but also a maternal ferocity. If they touched Dylan, she'd fight with her bare hands. The thugs rummaged, growing frantic. Call the boss. Tell him the evidence is compromised. One dialed, but before the call connected, a piercing scream shattered the night from outside, high-pitched, full of terror. Helena, waiting in the alley as planned, her distraction buying them seconds. The men bolted downstairs, cursing. What the? Lorraine didn't wait. She grabbed Dylan and the bag, bursting from the closet. They raced down the back stairs, slipping on ash, hearts in their throats. Out the door, into the alley where Helena waited, panting but triumphant. Run! They sprinted to the car, piling in as distant shouts echoed. Helena gunned the engine, peeling away into the night. Lorraine clutched the backpack, the evidence safe, but the close call left her breathless. Emotional peak 3. Relief flooded her, sharp and sweet, mingled with a newfound strength. At her age, she'd outrun danger, protected her son, and seized justice's thread. But as they sped toward safety, Reggie's phone lit up again. I know you're out there. We need to meet. The climax beckoned, but for now, they had the upper hand. The Volvo's tires squealed as Helena merged onto the expressway, putting distance between them and the smoldering ruins of the brownstone. Lorraine clutched the backpack to her chest, its contents a ticking bomb of evidence. Ledgers, the burner phone, notes that laid bare Reggie's web of lies. Her breath came in ragged gasps, the adrenaline from the narrow escape still buzzing through her veins like electricity. Dylan huddled in the back, wide-eyed but silent, his small hand reaching forward to touch hers. We got it, Mommy, he whispered, his voice a mix of awe and exhaustion. Helena glanced in the rear view, her face set in grim satisfaction. Damn right we did. Those goons'll report back to Reggie soon. Safe's disturbed, evidence gone. He'll panic, and that's when we strike. The city lights streaked by, Chicago's skyline a blur of steel and glass, but Lorraine felt untethered, like she'd left a piece of herself in those ashes. Back at the office, they barricaded the door and spread the hall across the desk under the harsh fluorescent light. Helena powered up the burner phone, No password. Reggie's arrogance on full display, and scrolled through texts. Confirm fire set for 11 p.m. Alibi in NY. Payout covers debts. Lorraine's stomach churned reading the cold exchanges with Marcus, one of the thugs, detailing the accident down to the gasoline type. The ledgers were worse, meticulous tallies of mob loans, interest compounding like a cancer, with margin notes. Insurance solves everything. Family out. Freedom. Emotional peak 1. Revulsion hit Lorraine like a wave, her hands balling into fists as she imagined Reggie scribbling this while she slept down the hall. At 58, she'd given him her trust, her years, only to be reduced to a line item in his escape plan. Helena made calls while Lorraine paced, Dylan dozing fitfully on the couch again. Moran? Yeah, it's Voss. Got a hot one. Attempted murder, arson, racketeering ties. Evidence solid as steel. Need your team for a sting. Detective Moran, a grizzled vet Helena had pulled from the brink in a corruption case years back, agreed without hesitation. Wire her up. Bring her to Grant Park tomorrow. Public spot, easy to cover. Lure him out, get a confession on tape. Lorraine's phone kept buzzing, Reggie's texts escalating. Saw the news. You're alive? Meet me. We talk? Or else. Helena nodded at the screen. Bait him. Say Grant Park, Fountain, 10 a.m. Alone. Lorraine typed with numb fingers. Grant Park, 10 a.m. Come clean, or I go to the cops. His reply was instant. I'll be there. This is all a misunderstanding. Sleep came in fits that night, Lorraine's mind replaying the thugs' voices, the scream that saved them. By morning, Moran's team wired her up in a nondescript van near the park, a tiny mic taped under her collar, earpiece hidden by her hair. Stay calm, get him talking, Moran instructed, his mustache twitching with focus. We've got eyes everywhere, undercover as joggers, vendors, the works. Grant Park bustled with the usual crowd. Tourists snapping photos of the Buckingham Fountain, kids chasing pigeons, the lake breeze carrying a hint of fall's end. Lorraine sat on a bench, the backpack of evidence stashed with Helena nearby, watching from a cafe. Dylan was safe with her, glued to a police radio feed. At 58, Lorraine felt exposed, vulnerable, but the wire was her shield, the plan her sword. Reggie appeared at 10 sharp, disheveled in a rumpled suit, dark circles under his eyes like bruises, his usual slick charm frayed at the edges. He spotted her and strode over, glancing around nervously before sitting too close. Lore, thank God. I thought you were gone. He reached for her hand. She yanked it back. Cut the act, Reggie. I saw it all. The men with your key, the fire. Dylan heard you planning it. His face paled, the mask slipping. What? No, you don't understand? I'm in deep debts to bad people. They forced me. The fire was supposed to be empty. I was protecting you. Lies poured out. But under her steady gaze, he cracked. Okay, fine. The insurance, it was the only way out. $500,000 owed, Lore. They'd come for us anyway. Better this way. Quick. Accidental. Emotional peak 2. Lorraine's heart shattered anew as he confessed, the words confirming her worst fears, but she pressed on, voice steady for the wire. You hired them to kill us. Your own son. Reggie's eyes darted, sweat beading on his forehead. The kid. Hell, he's not even mine, Lore. That affair you had back in 87 with that accountant? I knew, but I stuck around for the stability, the money. The revelation hit like a gut punch. Dylan not his? Memories flooded. A brief fling during one of Reggie's early trips. Guilt she'd buried deep. But Dylan was hers, blood or not, and this twist only fueled her fire. Reggie's desperation boiled over. He lunged, pulling a snub-nosed revolver from his coat. Give me the evidence. You took it from the safe. I know it. The park froze around them, but Lorraine stood her ground. It's over, Reggie. He pressed the gun to her side, rage twisting his features. "You ruined me! I end this now!" Chaos erupted. Undercover cops swarmed from benches and paths, shouting, "Drop it!" Reggie fired wildly, the shot grazing Lorraine's arm in a hot streak of pain. She dropped to the ground, blood blooming on her sleeve, as officers tackled him, the gun skittering across the pavement. Moran hauled Reggie up, cuffs clicking shut. "You're under arrest. Attempted murder, arson, the works." Reggie thrashed, spitting venom. "You'll pay for this, Lore!" But his eyes held defeat, the self-serving facade shattered. Lorraine clutched her arm, the sting secondary to the catharsis washing over her. Emotional peak 3. Triumph surged through the pain, a fierce joy at seeing him fall. At 58, she'd faced him down, protected her son, reclaimed her life. Helena rushed over with Dylan, who hugged her tight. "You did it, Mommy." As paramedics bandaged her, Moran grinned. "Tape's gold. He's done." But the wound, the secrets, it was just the beginning of healing. The paramedics' sirens faded into the distance as Lorraine sat in the back of Moran's unmarked car, her arm throbbing under the fresh bandage, the sting a sharp reminder that she'd stared down death and won, for now. Blood stained her sleeve, but the wound was superficial, they said, nothing a few stitches wouldn't fix. Dylan clung to her good side, his face buried in her jacket, while Helena barked orders into her phone. Coordinating with the precinct, Reggie's screams echoed in her ears as they hauled him away. "This ain't over, Lore! You'll regret this!" But his threats felt empty now, hollow rants from a man who'd lost his grip on the reins. At 58, with the park's fountain still gurgling in the background like nothing had happened, Lorraine felt a strange calm settle over her, the eye of the storm after the chaos. Moran clapped her on the shoulder gently. "You did good, Mrs. Baxter. That tape, it's airtight. We'll have him in front of a judge by morning." The months blurred into a whirlwind of legal wrangling, statements, and sleepless nights, where Lorraine replayed the park confrontation like a bad dream. By early 1996, the trial loomed in federal court downtown, the kind of high-profile case that drew reporters clustered outside the courthouse steps, notebooks at the ready. Reggie sat at the defense table in an ill-fitting suit. Gone was the flashy Rolex, confiscated as evidence. His face gaunt from jail time, eyes darting like a trapped animal. His lawyers spun tales of coercion by the mob, painting him as a victim of circumstance, but the evidence stacked against him like a house of cards, ready to topple. Helena, sharp as ever in her power suit, worked alongside the prosecutor, her no-nonsense testimony laying out the financial trail, the forged documents, the escalated insurance policy, the burner phone logs that traced straight to the arsonists. Lorraine took the stand on the third day, her hands steady as she swore the oath, dressed in a simple blouse and skirt that made her feel grounded, real. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee. The jury, a mix of everyday folks from the suburbs and city, watching her with sympathetic eyes. "Mrs. Baxter?" the prosecutor asked, his voice steady. "Can you describe what happened that night at the airport?" She recounted it all calmly, her voice unwavering. Dylan's whisper, the hidden vigil, the flames devouring their home. Emotional peak 1. As she spoke of Reggie's texts, the feigned concern while knowing they should be ashes, a quiet fury rose in her chest. Not the explosive kind, but a controlled burn that fueled her words. At her age, she'd learned to channel pain into purpose, and testifying felt like reclaiming her story from the man who'd tried to erase it. The turned arsonists, Marcus and his partner, cutting deals for lighter sentences, took the stand next, their testimonies damning. "Baxter hired us," Marcus grunted. avoiding Reggie's glare. Said make it look accidental, gas leak, paid half up front from that cash stash in his safe. The ledgers backed it up, pages projected on a screen for the jury to see. Debts to the outfit, repayment plans hinging on the insurance windfall. Reggie's recorded admissions from the park sealed it, the wire capturing his confession, the paternity twist thrown in like a desperate Hail Mary. Even the gunshot that grazed her arm adding attempted murder to the charges. The defense tried to poke holes, claiming duress and mental strain, but the federal jury wasn't buying it. Invoking the Anti-Arson Act for the deliberate destruction, they deliberated just 2 days before returning, guilty on all counts: attempted murder, insurance fraud, racketeering ties to the mob. Sentencing came a week later. The courtroom packed with whispers as the judge banged the gavel. Mr. Baxter, your actions were calculated, callous, endangering innocent lives for personal gain, he intoned, his voice echoing off the walls. 20 years in federal prison, no parole for at least 15. Reggie slumped, his head in his hands, but Lorraine felt no pity. Only a hollow relief as they led him away in cuffs, his eyes meeting hers one last time. A flicker of regret, or maybe just defeat. Emotional peak 2. Closure washed over her like a cool rain, quenching the fire of betrayal that had smoldered for months. At 58, she'd faced him in that park. But this verdict was the real victory, a door slamming on the past. With Reggie behind bars, the divorce proceedings moved swiftly, Helena handling the paperwork with her trademark efficiency. Irreconcilable differences doesn't cover it, she quipped, but the judge agreed, granting Lorraine full custody of Dylan and dissolving the marriage in a single hearing. The untouched insurance funds, ironically, the very policy Reggie had plotted around, became hers, the payout processed once fraud charges cleared her as the victim. $1.8 million minus legal fees, but enough to rebuild, a modest account for Dylan's future, therapy sessions to unpack the trauma, and a down payment on a cozy apartment in a quieter part of the city, away from Lincoln Park's ghosts. Lorraine signed the papers with a steady hand, the weight lifting as she walked out of the courthouse into the crisp spring air of '96. But rebuilding wasn't just financial, it was piecing together the shards of their lives. Lorraine enrolled in community college classes, something Reggie had always dismissed as unnecessary, studying family law basics drawn to stories like hers. Dylan, resilient as ever, started seeing a counselor, his quiet observations turning into drawings of superheroes saving the day, therapy helping him process the nightmares of flames and gunshots. Helena became a fixture, dropping by with takeout and advice, her tough exterior hiding a mentor's heart. "You're tougher than you know, Lore," she'd say over coffee. Emotional peak 3. Gratitude bloomed in Lorraine's chest, warm and sustaining, for the allies who'd pulled her through. Her dad's foresight, Helena's grit, Dylan's bravery. At her age, she'd thought life was winding down, but this was a new chapter, funded by the very scheme meant to end her. As the year turned, Lorraine stood in their new apartment's kitchen, unpacking boxes with Dylan giggling over a pizza dinner. The money had bought stability, a safe space with a view of the lake, locks she controlled, a life unscripted by Reggie's shadows. But whispers of the mob lingered. Moran's team assured her the racketeering charges had them scrambling, but safety meant vigilance. Still, for the first time in years, she felt free, the financial cushion a foundation to build on. Little did she know, the emotional scars would take longer to heal, leading to a purpose she never imagined. 5 years slipped by like pages in a book Lorraine never thought she'd finish reading, turning the raw edges of 1996 into the softer hues of 2000. Now 63, with silver threading through her hair and a few more lines around her eyes that she wore like badges of survival. Lorraine Baxter stood in the modest kitchen of their Edgewater apartment, stirring a pot of homemade cocoa on the stove. The place wasn't fancy, a two-bedroom walk-up with creaky floors and a view of Lake Michigan that shimmered on clear days. But it was theirs, bought outright with the insurance money that had once been Reggie's deadly gamble. No more shadows of Lincoln Park's grandeur. Here, the walls held fresh paint she'd chosen herself, shelves lined with books on law and resilience, and a small garden on the balcony where she grew herbs in defiance of Chicago's fickle weather. Life had rebuilt itself brick by brick, not in luxury, but in quiet authenticity. She'd thrown herself into the work that called to her soul, partnering with Helena in a small advocacy firm downtown, specializing in family law for women trapped in abusive cycles. It started small, volunteering at shelters, using her community college credits to assist on cases, but grew into something profound. Drawing from her ordeal, Lorraine became the voice for those who felt silenced, helping draft restraining orders, navigate custody battles, and secure safe housing. "I've been there," she'd tell clients over coffee in the office's cozy conference room, her eyes steady and kind. "The fear, the doubt, it's not your fault, and there's a way out." Helena, now pushing 70 but as sharp as ever, handled the courtroom fireworks, her gravelly voice cutting through defenses like a knife. "You're a natural, Lor," she'd say after a win, clapping her on the back. "Turned your hell into someone else's heaven?" The partnership wasn't just business. It was family. Helena dropping by for Sunday dinners, sharing war stories from her own brushes with betrayal that mirrored Lorraine's in eerie ways. Dylan, now 12 and shooting up like a weed, bounded into the kitchen with his backpack slung over one shoulder, fresh from school. Therapy had worked wonders, weekly sessions unpacking the trauma, turning his nightmares of flames into manageable memories. He still had that observant nature, those wide eyes that missed nothing, but now it channeled into positive pursuits, science club, where he built model rockets, and a budding interest in detective novels that made Lorraine smile. "Mom, check this out," he'd say, showing her a drawing of a gadget that could spot bad guys from a mile away. No more shying away from crowds. He had friends now, a group of kids who played basketball in the park. His laughter echoing up to the apartment on weekends. The paternity revelation from the park had stung at first, Reggie's cruel twist about the affair, but Lorraine had sat him down that night, explaining with gentle honesty. "Blood or not, you're my son, through and through, and that's what matters." Dylan had nodded, processing it in his quiet way, and it only strengthened their bond, turning a weapon into a weld. As the cocoa simmered, filling the air with rich chocolate warmth, Lorraine poured 2 mugs and carried them out to the cozy porch. The sun dipped low over the lake, painting the sky in oranges and pinks, a gentle breeze rustling the potted plants. Dylan joined her, kicking off his sneakers and curling up in the wicker chair beside hers, mug in hand. "How was school?" she asked, sipping slowly, the steam curling like memories. "Good. Got an A on that history project. Teacher said my research was detective level." He grinned, that boyish charm peeking through the tween awkwardness. Lorraine laughed, a sound that came easier these days. "That's my boy. Always watching, always figuring things out." They sat in comfortable silence for a bit, watching joggers on the path below, the world moving on as it always did. But then Dylan set his mug down, his expression turning thoughtful. "Mom, do you ever think about that night? At the airport?" Lorraine's heart tugged. 5 years to the day, actually, though she hadn't mentioned it. Emotional peak 1. A soft ache bloomed in her chest, not the sharp pain of before, but a tender reminder of how far they'd come. "Every now and then?" she admitted, reaching for his hand. But not like I used to. It's part of us. But it doesn't define us anymore. He nodded, squeezing back. Your warnings saved us, you know. You were so brave, even then. Dylan looked out at the water, his voice quieter. I still miss the old house sometimes, the backyard swing, my room. But I'm glad we're here, with you. Therapy had taught him to voice these things, the mixed feelings of loss and gratitude. Lorraine pulled him into a side hug, his head fitting under her chin now that he was growing so tall. Me too, sweetie. We've built something real here, stronger than before. Emotional peak too. Pride swelled in her, warm and steady, for the confident young man he was becoming. His wary edges softened into empathy. Her own healing mirrored his. Nights still came with occasional sweats, dreams of fire or Reggie's face in the park, but they faded with time. Replaced by purpose. Helena's influence shone through, too. She'd become Aunt Hel, mentoring Lorraine through bar exams she'd tackled at 60, cheering when she passed and joined the firm officially. Together, they'd helped dozens of women, escaping controlling husbands, reclaiming finances, starting over. One case last month, a woman in her 50s, much like Lorraine had been, fleeing a gambler spouse with mob ties, hit close to home. You saved me, the client had whispered after the protection order came through. Lorraine had hugged her, whispering back, No, you saved yourself. We just lit the path. It was in these moments that the pain transformed, turning betrayal into a beacon for others. As the sky darkened, stars peeking through the city haze, Dylan yawned. Can we watch that old mystery movie tonight? The one with the clever kid detective? Lorraine smiled. Sure thing. Popcorn, too. They headed inside, the porch light flickering on automatically, a small security she'd installed herself. Reggie was a distant echo now, serving his time in some federal pen upstate, his appeals denied, the mob ties unraveling his old network. Lorraine rarely thought of him, except in passing gratitude that he'd shown her her own strength. Life wasn't perfect. Bills still came, winters were brutal, and at 63, her knees protested the stairs some days. But it was hers, woven with threads of resilience and love. Dylan thrived, his observant spark now aimed at dreams of becoming an engineer, building things that lasted. And Lorraine? She'd found her voice, her purpose, partnering with Helena to pull others from the darkness she'd known. Emotional peak 3. A deep, abiding hope filled her as she locked the door behind them, the apartment warm and inviting. They'd turned pain into strength, warnings into wisdom, and in that, found a happiness hard-won but wholly theirs. As Dylan flipped on the TV, laughter filling the room, Lorraine knew. They hadn't just survived, they'd flourished. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe, like and share, so I can keep creating more stories like this for you. Thank you,